Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Anda sedang menonton agenda Awani secara langsung dari studio Awani di Kewangan Kuala Lumpur. Dan kita mahu pendidikan untuk semua di Malaysia. Kerana itu pembawa penting, pencetus mobiliti, sosial, ekonomi dan juga politik kerana ia memberikan kita pengetahuan. Tapi dalam konteks itu, walaupun negara memang cuba memberikan semuanya kepada semua rakyat yang ada secara equity dan juga secara merit, tapi mahu tidak mahu, ada kelompok yang memang teratas sekali. Kalau piramid, dia paling di puncak lah dari segi bakat dan juga kecerdasan yang ada. Oleh itu, malam ini saya nak berbicara tentang mereka yang cukup pintar ini dalam pelbagai aspek. I would like now to speak in English because I have very important guests for tonight, world-renowned experts on this matter. Of course, closest to me from our very own Permata Pintar Negara, Professor Datuk Dr. Noriah Muhammad Ishak, the director of this very interesting. I've been promising to go and visit, but I haven't done that. I'll do that soon.
Tomorrow.
Yes. But before that, I have to introduce Professor Emerita Dr. Joyce Van Tassel Baska. She has written 28 books and 550 refereed journals. And if you go on the internet, I've been hounding her on the internet for the last 24 hours, and I could not even finish 10%, I guess. And she's the Professor Emerita College of William and Mary in Virginia. Thank you so much. But you're one of the leading voices talk about curriculum, to talk about how do you even speak to gifted students, for example, and treat them in terms of, do you treat them as kids, do you treat them as adults, how do you approach them? So that's why I'm going to go to you. But from yesterday, today and tomorrow, 3 days, there's this gathering of thought leaders and of experts, and very importantly, to discuss about matters like this. So I'm going to let Professor Dr. Noriah Muhammad Ishak to maybe give us the overview for those of us who are not lucky enough to be there. What have you been doing for the last 2 days? Because I'm sure it's been explosive in terms of thinking. How do you treat and nurture gifted students?
Well, I have given you the invitation 2 years ago.
Yes.
But you never take on the invitation.
No, it's okay.
So you must come
we take it this way. Yes.
So how do we nurture gifted students? Saya cakap dalam bahasa Melayu because I think for our audience kan. Jadi kalau kita nak nurture pelajar-pelajar pintar dan berbakat ini, dia mesti ada environment yang sesuai. Saya suka mengambil pendekatan daripada Profesor Garnier. Dia pun ada kat conference kita. Ya. Memang saya dan tim saya bawa all the renowned people, Profesor Garnier, Profesor Pentasel Baska dan juga Dr. Linda Brody. So kalau ikutkan Profesor Garnier, dia kata kita ni ada anugerah Tuhan yang dibagi kepintaran kita macam-macam bentuk, sama ada in sports ke, in menari ke, muzik ke, akademik ke. Tetapi gift itu tak akan jadi talent kalau environment dan catalyst dalam environment itu tak berfungsi dengan baik. Jadi tugas kita adalah menyediakan persekitaran yang membina itu untuk pelajar-pelajar ni. So for the last, my dear Kamarul, for the last 1 day, 2 days, we have been discussing in our conference on how to create such environment for the students, for our children. Jadi it's very interesting sebab kita dapati dalam kita punya pertemuan 2 hari ini, peserta daripada Singapore, daripada Hong Kong, China, India, Pakistan, USA, Australia, I cannot remember.
Ini bukan saja untuk yang paling atas dekat piramid tu.
Yang datang pun atas juga piramidnya. Jadinya sekarang ni all of us discuss tentang how do we then help these students. These students kat piramid atas tu lah. It is basically 0.01%. Macam kita kat Malaysia, every year kita uji 350,000. Yang masuk program kita 100 lebih saja. Which is how many percent tu kan, sikit-sikit sangat kan. Tetapi pada saya, yang kat luar lagi ramai. Yang kita dah uji dan kita kenal pasti, tapi tak dapat bawa masuk sebab limited space. So sebagai satu nation, saya rasa this is the platform yang kita di Permata Pintar gunakan untuk memberi kesedaran kepada ibu bapa, pengetua, guru-guru, the counsellors tentang siapa budak pintar ni, apa kita buat dengan mereka, adakah kita dah buat yang mencukupi dengan mereka, adakah kurikulum kita mencabar mereka dan sebagainya. Yes.
That's why I would like to go to Prof. Emerita Dr. Joyce Van Tassel Baska on this, because even like what the professor has said here, that we can only take a certain percentage. And I'm sure for those we have taken in, there will be those who will still be in the system outside. So first and foremost, if you can tap into your thinking on this, is that yes, there'll be specific initiative like Permata, but that doesn't mean that everyone else, everywhere else, should not be looking out for and trying to treat and nurture the same kind of potentials outside. So I guess this is the first battle, because the challenge of education is to give it to all. But once you have one size fits all, those that are a bit different would not be conforming to that particular one size fits all. So what would you suggest for us? Because you've been around the world talking, writing, researching on this matter. So what would be the best middle way out?
Well, I think there's a number of ways that gifted students can be served effectively, but I certainly think that the talent development model, which is very strong here in Malaysia as the points for your schools that are in place right now, is a very good direction to be going.
Okay.
And talent development implies the focus is on creating programs and services that potentially can benefit as many students as you're able to find. And so even the notion of putting an artificial cap on a number of students to be served is only useful when it comes to limited funding and a particular target, emphasis of the program. But in reality, if you're able to create talent development mechanisms that are systematic and that are in place in a number of different areas, then many more students potentially might benefit, even though maybe not directly and even maybe not at exactly the same time as a first group of students might benefit. But later on, much of what goes on in gifted and talented education ultimately can become mainstream when it comes to the issue of curriculum and instruction.
That's why I want to go to, after this, we have to go for the first break, but once we are back, how do you mainstream it? Because sometimes it's not about the multi-million-dollar budget. Sometimes it's just the whole thinking and approach to it. If we were to admit the talents of the young, we first must listen and hear them out. For example, if we expect them to sit quietly in class, don't make noise, only digest what I'm giving to you, and more we see that in the 21st century, the role of educationists are becoming more of a facilitating role, rather than just like a mother bird, taking in the food and then making it soft enough for the chicks to digest. So I'm going to tap your expert and learned experience on that, but I'm going to go back to also Professor and say that while we're working with the 100 out of the 500,000 every year that we have, for example, how then do we make them still be relevant to the outside world while making them special in their own world? Because at the end of the day, they're not going to be judged on just their talents and IQ, but also on how much they give back to the community and society, and they have to be real about that. So that we'll discuss after this short break. Anda masih menonton agenda Awani dan saya masih membicarakan tentang suatu persidangan ataupun conference, International Conference on Gifted and Talented Education, 8 to 10 Disember, 8 ke 10 Disember ini di Pusat Permata Pintar Negara. Bosnya ada di sini. Dan sebelum saya pergi kembali kepada, before I go back to Professor Emerita Dr. Joyce Wantal Silvaska, saya nak tanya Professor Dr. Noriah dalam hal ini kerana kita tahu banyak perkara bagus. Mereka antara yang kita percaya mereka antara 0.01% yang terhebat di negara ini untuk kumpulan umum mereka. Tetapi bagaimana bila kita mengambil mereka keluar masuk dalam satu sistem khas, ekosistem khas, itu kita masih lagi ada jaringan dengan realiti yang berlaku di luar. Kerana saya rasa kematangan itu perlu dibina dalam kedua-duanya, kerana nilai itu perlu bergabung di tengah.
Betul, saya sangat-sangat setuju Kamarul. That's why bila kita buat program Permata Pintar itu, kita bukan sahaja menekankan kepada aspek kognisi. Kita kena juga fikirkan macam mana kita nak buatkan pelajar-pelajar ni supaya dia realise bahawa whatever it is, you're up on the sky, your foot must be rooted to the ground. Betul tak? Jadi macam mana kita buat kan? Jadi di Permata Pintar, kita cuba buat, contohnya satulah saya ambil ya. Kita ada voluntary services. It's compulsory for every student to do voluntary services. Dan the voluntary services tu yang propose dia orang, bukan kita. So they have to come up with a proposal mengatakan bahawa okay, they want to do voluntary services macam ni kat sini. This is the budget. Can they do it or not? Jadi every student markah voluntary services tu 15%.
Okay. Macam kat universiti.
Macam kat universiti.
Okay.
Tapi this one, they have to do it themselves. Dia kena bawa students tu datang rumah. It's their choice. So far setakat ni saya nampak pelajar-pelajar ni buat voluntary services yang dalam negara lah. Di rumah anak yatim, di rumah ibu tunggal dan sebagainya. Mereka buat tuition classes dan sebagainya. Tapi ada juga pelajar kita yang take the initiative to do the voluntary services kat luar negara. So this year we had 12 student daripada Malaysia, daripada Pantai Pintar yang belajar bahasa Jerman. Dia pergi ke Jerman for 3 weeks dan di sana mereka mengajar tadika bahasa Jerman.
Saya suka dengar tu. I would like now, before I bring Professor Emerita Dr. Joyce Van Tassel Baska in, I would like to go to my colleague in we call it Kini Trendy. Looks at what's trending on the social media and what's the chatter about gifted students online or even about the conference. Jadi saya ingin terus bersama dengan Umaira.
Baik, Cik Kam, apa yang kami dapat cari tadi ya, kajian menunjukkan terdapat seorang pelajar pintar dan berbakat bagi setiap 10,000 orang kanak-kanak. Dan Malaysia mempunyai seramai 3.5 juta kanak-kanak yang berumur antara 9 hingga 15 tahun dan ini bermakna terdapat 350,000 orang pelajar pintar di kalangan rakyat Malaysia. Dan dari situ tercetus idea untuk melaksanakan program asuhan dan didikan awal kanak-kanak permata bagi memberi peluang khususnya kepada kanak-kanak di bawah umur 4 tahun untuk mengalami proses pembelajaran awal yang berkualiti dalam suasana pembelajaran yang menyeronokkan. Dan program Permata Pintar terdiri daripada 13 bidang kursus merangkumi penulisan, reka cipta dan bioteknologi. Bidang yang kami rasakan mungkin paling menarik minat pengguna di media sosial adalah bidang robotik. Ini kerana video tentang pembangunan robotik paling banyak dikongsi melalui YouTube dan kursus pengenalan robotik juga membantu pelajar memahami dan mengaplikasikan pelbagai topik yang merangkumi sains komputer dan juga kejuruteraan. Pelajar akan membina pelbagai jenis robot menggunakan peralatan Lego Mindstorms dan bahasa pengaturcaraan NextG. Dalam fasa reka bentuk, topik merangkumi asas fizikal kejuruteraan seperti sistem kejuruteraan, beberapa struktur mesin yang ringkas, kestabilan struktur dan lokomotif dan mereka juga didedahkan kepada prinsip kejuruteraan elektrik seperti maklum balas deria, litar, signal dan komunikasi berdijit frekuensi radio. Dan itu antara yang dapat kami kongsikan berkenaan dengan topik ini, Cik Kam.
Okay, terima kasih, Mara. I would like to go to Professor Emerita Dr. Joyce Van Tassel Baska on this. Keeping them rooted to the ground, making them pursue until the frontiers of knowledge is the ideal scenario and picture. But I would like also to see how, because you can't escape from talking about pedagogy, curriculum, whatever else. So, but more and more, and I've read this, about what's been said by you, is about also this problem-based learning. Because the world nowadays, in the 21st century, we know more of problems rather than solutions sometimes. A lot of people still think about climate change, how are we going to adapt, why aren't the countries of the world, they are so clever and developed, but they're not agreeing to the carbon cap emission and stuff like that. So would that be exposed and need to be exposed so early to gifted students? Because if they can think about it now, then by the time they have the capacity to do something about it, they will already be executing it.
In many of the programs around the world, the focus on problem-based learning, on project-based learning, both are major approaches that are used with gifted learners and from very early on, as early as the primary grades. And the emphasis on that approach brings into play the teaching of higher level skills, such as critical thinking, creative thinking, problem solving, research skills, all of the 21st century skills that are essential for doing the jobs of the 21st century and being able to function effectively within those jobs, particularly at professional levels. So that's one of the advantages of problem-based learning. But a second is that it provides connected learning. It helps students realize that real-world problems aren't bounded by disciplines. They fundamentally are linked across disciplines and across areas of knowledge. And so they learn about how those connections are so important to making new real-world discoveries. Most of our universities now run centers that are cross-disciplinary, Why? Because that's how new knowledge fundamentally comes into being. A third advantage of an approach like problem-based learning is that it also deals with collaboration. Students very early on learn that it isn't just about me and it isn't about what I'm interested in, but it's rather about all of us or a small group of us and how we can collaborate together to build a better mousetrap, to create a project that is worthy of the nature of what needs to be done.
Very much. I like the concept of it. But how do we network gifted students in all the countries across? Because right now it seems to me that every country is very guarded about their gifted students. They're like in this ecosystem that's been built for them. But the more we expose them to interact with one another, they might be bringing solutions that the leaders of G20 hasn't thought of. For example, it might be practical.
Yes.
I remember a story about the NASA Mars rovers. It's when they go down to schools that the rover actually doesn't have to be 4 tires, it could be 6 tires, so that it's not stuck to the rocks on surface of Mars. So there have been proof of ideas coming from such a young age that will just see things completely from opposite directions maybe. So let's talk about how do we make the gifted students all over the world network and come up with good things that can make humankind better right after this short break. Anda masih menonton agenda Awani dan adakah anda mengetahui anak anda begitu berbakat dan begitu pintar, anda perlu menghantarnya kepada pusat permata pintar negara untuk diuji ataupun dilihat.
Tak payah. It's
tak payah.
online.
Boleh buat secara dalam talian. Saya pun tak tahu.
Dia 1 Februari dah mula dah.
Okey, boleh buat secara dalam talian kerana saya tahu persaingan di antara ibu bapa itu penting sekali dan kalau ada mereka tentunya mahu mengetahui bagaimana nak memberikannya lebih ruang untuk berkembang. Dalam konteks itu, I would like now to switch to English because I would like to go to Prof. Emerita Dr. Joyce Van Tassel-Baska again on this. I'm sure you've heard, Singapore has been focusing on gifted students for so long. And there are other countries in the world looking at that. We know during the Cold War that the Soviet Union was looking at gifted soldiers since, maybe preschool even. So, but in the 21st century, it's a more open society globally. So how do you reap the best of social media and multidisciplinary approach and also gifted children at such a young age?
How do you make the connections, you mean, across students from different societies? Well, I think that we have many international competitions that become a wonderful way for these students to connect. International competitions that are held every year, where students get together from all over the world. We have a wonderful program that is a mock United Nations, where students solve the real problems of the world and are given roles to perform in regard to that, so that they can really see what the adult world is like in relationship to that. There's another program that's called Future Problem Solving, which gives students real-world scenarios, and they work in teams to see what they can come up with, and then they share across teams different strategies for doing so. So there's a lot of different competitions like that, as well as within disciplines, like the Olympiads, which are all within subject areas, where students from different countries compete.
The reason I ask that, because more and more, it's not about whether we have the technology or knowledge or not, but it's more about whether we agree to work together or not.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So I think children or young students, they don't look at boundaries so much. They're more practical than that. Or am I wrong in that sentence?
No, I don't think you're wrong at all. I think the social media issue, the connectivity through the computer that they've experienced really from almost day one of their lives has broken down a lot of what they would consider artificial boundaries, and that people are very common underneath it all, that we all have common kinds of problems to deal with and approaches to live our lives.
Beyond nation states.
Yes.
Well, I've said that, but I would like to use a few remaining minutes to ask Professor Dr. Noria to sell Malaysia and sell Malaysians gifted children in Malay will be tolong berikan contoh-contoh kepada kami yang kurang dan tak pernah masuk ke pusat permata pintar ni tentang kehebatan-kehebatan yang telah pun dibincangkan dalam conference ni dan di sebaliknya?
Kehebatan tu banyak sebenarnya ya. Saya bagi kehebatan pelajar kita sajalah.
Pelajar kita.
Our first batch of students now are in Cornell, John Hopkins. They're graduating next year. Dia masuk universiti umur 15 tahun. And they are performing at 4 flat.
Walaupun pada usia 15 tahun.
Walaupun pada usia 15 tahun. And kita ada seorang pelajar hari tu, Raha Azhara nama dia, now di Boston U. Dia diminta untuk berucap di United Nations. Baru ni meeting September hari tu. And she made such a good impression to the public dekat dalam United Nations that PM receive congratulatory notes. Orang ucap terima kasih pada Tan Sri. And Tan Sri dapat STEM Hero Award for working on the STEM programs and supporting us. Jadi saya rasa kita kat Malaysia ni, each time that kita buka minda kita, terima that there is this little group of children yang memang hebat, yang has been promoted so well by our apa nama tu, Isteri Perdana Menteri dan program kita. Kita terima mereka, kita terima kekuatan mereka, kita terima apa mereka boleh buat dalam society dan kita lihat mereka sebagai aset negara kita.
Untuk masa depan.
Untuk masa depan, saya rasa sekarang ni kita as a whole, as a society,
kalau boleh kita nak besarkan program ni.
Yes, kita tak naklah kecil sampai bila kan. So saya haraplah kita ada MARA, kita ada Kementerian Pelajaran. Let's work together. Macam mana kita nak membantu promote these students and bring them to greater height so that one day Malaysia can be proud duduk berdiri dekat Sweden, dekat mana tu, dan one of us dapat Nobel Prize.
Di Stockholm.
Yes, di Stockholm.
Di Karolinska Institute.
Yes.
Ataupun di mana jua.
Di mana
ada 4 kategori yang kita boleh tanding. I would like to say thank you to Professor Emerita Dr. Joyce Van Tassel Baska, but I would like to say that Professor Dr. Noria will have to come again and possibly bring one of the gifted students to be here so that he or she get exposed to this herself.
I would love to do that. Yes.
Dan kita terpaksa teruskan diskusi ini. Kita tak boleh hentikan kerana ini masa depan untuk negara dan dunia. Ada banyak masalah dunia yang sekarang tidak dapat diselesaikan lagi oleh pemimpin dan saintis-saintis masa kini. Tapi pemimpin dan saintis masa depan mungkin boleh menyelesaikannya. Anda boleh hantarkan pandangan anda sendiri kepada pelbagai platform yang Astro Awani ada. Jangan lupa besok ada 1 hari lagi IC Gate ini. Jadi pergi dalam talian, bagi anak-anak anda ambil ujian itu dan anda boleh serbu saja Pusat Permata Pintar ni besok. Dapatkanlah apa yang boleh dapat yang dibenarkan di situ.
Jumpa saya.
Boleh jumpa Profesor Dr. Noria. Sekian, selamat malam. Terima kasih. Jumpa lagi. Thank you so much.